Previously on the Project Umbrella podcast.
Oh my fucking days, have I got to do this again?
But it all fits perfectly well, and this is the sort of thing that Remake 2 is just going to ruin, I think.
We've finally got there.
We know Ada obviously escapes Raccoon City thanks to her rocket-propelled lipstick.
Operation Raccoon City, I just love it.
In direct answer, I felt the motorbike sequence was cringe-worthy to the maximum.
Moving to the next one.
Yeah.
Is this 1996?
Project Umbrella.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Project Umbrella podcast, saving the world from poorly translated biohazard material. And what we'd assumed was a nasty pain brought on because we were playing Umbrella Corps, we're now attributing that to Harvey Weinstein. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune. Let's see who's joining us today. He's not the hero of the north of England needs right now, but he's the one they deserve. Big improvement needed, said his last performance review. It's Batman.
Good evening.
He's just signed up to Amazon Prime. He's signed up for the daily alerts. His recorder is on standby, and he's cosplaying as a hobbit, all in preparation for the TV event series of the decade. It's Stars Tyrant.
Cheers, thanks for that. I daren't be negative.
And finally, he's recently revealed on Facebook that he has a larger DVD collection than what Jimmy Savile had at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. It's Romby. Coming up on today's podcast.
What a fucking brave card you're playing at the minute with everything that's going on. Jesus. We'll never get fucking employed anywhere again.
So yes, we're doing a B.O.W. podcast today. We're going to be looking at generally which has been the most effective B.O.Ws, which are the worst. We've had lots of comments on our Facebook page, so lots of listener input, which is great. We're also going to be looking at some of the specific B.O.W. families that have arisen through the series and discussing the Tyrant and the Hunter programs as well. And we'll be finishing off with a B.O.W. special of Neptune's Biohazard quiz. So first up, we'll start with the news. So, first bit of news. Resident Evil, the live-action TV show, or Dave, as it's been colloquially called, that recently got released by the producers, removing all biohazard references. It was about a 12 to 15-minute production. Quite corny, I suppose is one way of describing it, but what did everyone think?
I loved it. I thought it was genuinely devastating that it didn't go to series.
That can't be your opinion on it, surely not.
No, it truly is. I thought it was fantastic.
Batman, do you agree with that? Are you going to support him in that?
Not at all, no. I think it was awful. To be honest, I think I've watched it once. It was okay. It was okay until the zombie showed up. If they'd done a full pilot episode with Resident Evil references in it, I wouldn't have minded watching it. I think they said that the police officer was supposed to be Marvin Branner, for example. And I think the producers said in an interview he's still trying to make a feature-length pilot episode with or without Resident Evil references in it. So we'll see what happens, but I thought it was all right for what it was. Certainly better than the movies anyway.
I'll give it one thing. It got more atmosphere in 12 minutes than certainly the second, third, fourth, fifth, and probably sixth Resident Evil live-action films. Romby, did you have any different views on that? Or?
I did not even watch it.
You're missing out, my friend.
I had it on my list of things to do that week, and it was just a super busy week. So
for me, and I know I'll get slated for it quite rightly, perhaps, because I've grown up with Biohazard, and it was all my favourite franchise when I was at that age. I kind of got the same feeling that I had when I went to see the first Resident Evil film, seeing your franchise up in lights. It's like, oh my god, I'm actually in the cinema where you watch big Hollywood blockbusters, and I'm seeing Resident Evil in the cinema. And I kind of got that same kind of feeling, that kind of gloating, I know more about this than Joe Bloggs sitting down on the road in the cinema. And I think there's a compulsive need to want it to be really good, so that if it kicks off and becomes a huge thing like Game of Thrones, for example, you're going, yeah, I liked it before you liked it, mate. that kind of feeling. And so I think from my point of view, there's always that need to like it, which is why I still have a soft spot for the first Resident Evil film, but obviously that went progressively downhill. So I thought for the first 12 minutes it was quite good. We had a kind of weird mansion, big house type thing. Acting was on the okay-ish side. I thought the zombie was quite cool. I thought it looked quite creepy. You could see it coming, and I don't know. I thought it was alright. I'd like to see more of it.
The premise is a good one. You know, a detective working for the RPD investigating the murders that lead up to the mansion incident. I think that's a good idea rather than having it purely focused on like the STARS members and, you know, showing hunters and lickers running around in bad CGI. That just wouldn't work. You could have lots of cameos, like have a press conference with Chief Irons or have a Wesker walk past in the background, stuff like that. But I think the idea itself is not a bad one at all.
It would have been interesting to see if it ever did get commissioned. How I suppose it's a bit like Gotham, isn't it? In that sense, it's like, at what point do you end it? Because you're now at the point where Batman's ready to come onto the scene. At what point would Arklay have finished? Would it have been everything leading up to the mansion incident? How often do you bring the STARS team into the show, if at all? Do you recanonize that village story with Jill? All these things that you could have done. So yeah, I agree. The premise was quite good.
I did actually think it was atrocious.
No.
But in trying to be constructive, I think the reason it didn't go to series was because there was not a single original idea in there. I think in the wave of like current TV, you really have to do something to stand out. And I think The Walking Dead kind of has the... And I know its ratings aren't what they were at the minute. I think this series is a particularly rough patch for The Walking Dead. But that kind of has the zombie monopoly, if you like, for TV. And a guy just walking around quiet houses in the dark with a flashlight, I just don't think it's enough to stand out. You didn't get enough from the characters, I don't think. They seemed pretty paper thin. I know it was only a 15-minute teaser to test the waters, but some shows establish a lot in their first
30 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, leading on to that is how far could it have gone before too many people in the RPD knew of the existence of basically the undead?
It is worth saying we don't know how it would have felt with the Resident Evil references in. I sort of see what you're saying, Nick. I think you probably would have had that real kick if, like, the MO disc you found in the barbecue it just had the Umbrella logo on. You'd be like, oh, fucking hell.
Exactly.
The problem, though, then, and this is another part of the issue with the pilot, is that it can't also rely on that as well. Like, you can't just be putting those things in and it's only for people who know the reference. It's a bonus if people get it, but you need to have something grounded and established in order to make it work for people who have not seen or played or done anything with this franchise before. It has to be inclusive of that as well.
Yeah.
So it has to work both ways. So I know someone who tried to get a Silent Hill TV series off the ground several years ago, and they struck the same issues. So.
Next bit of news. Sales figures. We always like to update our listeners with sales figures. This is obviously predominantly looking at Resident Evil 7, which is now sold 4.1 million copies. How does that compare to the others? I hear you say Resident Evil 2, 4.96 million units. Resident Evil / Director's Cut, 5.8 million. Resident Evil 4, 6.9 million. Resident Evil 6, 8.2 million now. And the biggie, Resident Evil 5, still kicking ass after all these years, 10.5 million units. Much to your delight, I'm sure, Batman and Stars.
Nick, you can't mention us in the same sentence.
No,
What are you doing? I think, haven't all 4, 5 and 6 had a reasonably good boost of sales with the PS4
digital
releases?
Re-releases in digital gave them a massive boost.
I find mad. It's like, who is still buying them?
They're almost constantly on sale. When there's a sale up, they usually go up, or packages, which probably helps. Lots of people repurchasing them, obviously, as well. I mean, that's the thing, you got to put in context. This is the thing, it's just like, so Resident Evil 7's past what they hope to get in its first release month.
Yep.
Which is great, and it will probably get a boost from Gold Edition. So you would hope it would pass 5 million within the first year of release, but that'll still be short of where they wanted it to be, which they expected sell another 2 million this year. Maybe with Gold Edition, maybe possible.
I mean, from my point of view, in liking the direction Resident Evil 7 took, it's still well short of Resident Evil 6.
Yeah, but Resident Evil 6 underperformed at release. Like, if you go back to the original first year PS3, Xbox 360 sales, it was definitely way down. And also, Capcom had already shorted its sales predictions before it even launched, because they were less confident in it, the way it was going. So the fact that it just had long legs, I think, has probably surprised everyone. I mean, it surprised us, obviously.
It would be interesting to note how profitable Resident Evil 7 is, though, because I can't imagine it cost as much as Resident Evil 6 to make.
They've said it wasn't the case. They've already said that it was profitable sales at 3 point something.
Oh, okay.
So I can't remember whether it was in the financial reports or news story. But this is the other thing you got to put into context is like, for example, the sales of Resident Evil 2 on PlayStation was at 4.9. The majority of that 4.9 within the first 8 months of release.
Was it?
Because they re-released it with the DualShock version, which isn't counted into that, which has its own sales chart, because that came out about 10 months, 19 months after the original release of Resident Evil 2. So those PlayStation sales only count the first so many months, plus PAL versions.
Would that include the N64 version?
No, that's just the PlayStation version.
Just
by itself.
PlayStation.
Because the other thing that changes these sales markers is that 4 doesn't, but 5 and 6 in particular combine all platforms.
Oh.
They started doing this because at first it was because they were day and date, so like 5 launched on multiple platforms same day, so those sales are combined. Now for some reason they just start combining all the sales total. So you'll see on the list of releases, like 5 and 6 have, PS3, Xbox 360, PS4, Xbox One, digital download, PC. Why, other than to boost the look of the sales, I don't know. But 7 has the same thing, like that's combined sales to 7 on all platforms.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Romby, for that. It's a lot of useful information. Other bit of news, Revelations 2. Yes, now available on your Nintendo Switch platform. I think, Stars Tyrant, you have a Nintendo Switch.
I do, yeah.
Are you going to be purchasing this just so you can play the brand new Ghost Ship Panic and the Ghouls and Homoloculi?
I won't. I won't pick it up because there's not enough in there for me personally to repurchase it when you've already got like definitive versions on PS4. But it's got some tagged on motion controls that make it look like it plays quite similar to 4 Wii Edition.
Ah, good. That was good.
Which would be a draw to some people. You've got like the swinging of the Joy-Cons to mimic the knife, and I think it uses the accelerometer in it or whatever to do the aiming. So they look functional ports. I don't know if they're the full fat 60 frames a second versions as you get on the PS4, but they look the part, and on a portable screen they'll look great. They'll translate really well.
Capcom have just announced they've cancelled the physical release for Europe.
Yeah.
That's a drawback as well. Only being able to have like a digital version of Revelations 2, and then now we're not even getting Revelations 1 over here physically.
They've just said it's not viable to release them physically in Europe.
I'm guessing it's because of the number of language versions.
Yeah.
For packaging and so forth. The carts themselves will have multi-language, but the packaging requirements.
Storage on the carts is very limited.
Well, that's the other thing. The cost ratio is pretty high. I mean, that's the problem that cartridge formats going decades back always had, is that they cost more expensive. But the thing is, it then puts the cost on the end user because they have to have SD cards big enough for the space to download. So
I suppose the big question on everyone's lips is, are these new side-scrolling action games canon?
I'd be very surprised.
Moving on, Capcom have released 2 new trailers for the downloadable content for RE7. Tape 2, Redfield, and Tape 3, Lucas, gives us a good flavour of the Not a Hero DLC, as well as the traps and enemies that Chris is going to be encountering. We've got new moulded variants, don't look too dissimilar to what we've encountered beforehand, in my opinion, but never mind. And we also get to see the group that Chris leads already in Saw-like traps. We don't quite know how they got caught, but clearly the combat training they've been doing hasn't been effective. We also get a glimpse of End of Zoe DLC introducing the new character called Joe, who looks bearded Father Christmas type chap. And he comes to rescue Zoe after she's turned into a weeping angel type creature. Somehow restored, we don't know yet, who knows. And that's all we've really had on End of Zoe. We've had no real gameplay elements. We don't know who the main baddie's going to be. We don't know where it's going to be set. We assume in the swamp, but that's only an assumption. All will be answered on December the 12th when RE7 Gold Edition is released. Except unless you live in Japan, they get it on the 14th, so screw them. Thoughts?
I can't wait. I'm even looking forward to Not a Hero just as a VR experience. I think it'll be really good fun. We'll see what Chris has been up to, hopefully. But End of Zoe, I just cannot wait for. I think it's going to be fabulous. I really hope it is. I've said before that Daughters is one of my favourite chapters of recent years, and this just feels like a sort of successor to that. Interestingly, I don't know if we'll be playing as Zoe, because the wording on the websites, and I don't think it's been confirmed anywhere, but the wording doesn't actually describe like the player character. It just sort of says witness, Zoe's end. Whereas the Not a Hero description specifically says take control of Chris.
I mean, maybe the clue is in the title itself. It's the end of Zoe. Like, it's like not just the end of the story. It's, I don't know. We'll find out. I enjoy the fact they haven't been showing much from it. I think leaving that to a surprise is much better.
Yeah.
They've done well.
Yeah, I was going to say a bit of resolve from Capcom to not always show everything before they release it. Who knows? There might be a final launch trailer which shows way too much in December, but we'll see.
All I want from Not a Hero story-wise is more information on the original rival company, because we know they've evolved into this new umbrella, but if they give us a name for the company, for what it was when Wesker was there originally, and some more information, because that is one of the last remaining unanswered plot threads from the old generation of storylines, so I'm hoping we get some information that way, because I couldn't really care less about this new umbrella. I'm more interested in what the rival company were originally, when the old umbrella was still about. So I'm just hoping they don't put that HCF reference they had in the base game to waste.
I really feel like putting that in there had intent. If it went, and I'd be exactly the same if it went to waste because it wasn't pre-planned to have that in there. So specific.
Because as a reminder, I suppose, with HCF first featured in Code Veronica, there's always been an assumption it's always been the paramilitary wing of the organisation that Wesker's working for. Whether they expand upon that anymore, we don't know. And of course, this is the organisation he worked for before starting to associate himself with Seashell, Tricell, whatever you want to call them.
Can someone remind me, it's not in any written form in Code Veronica other than what's on the back of his thing, on the back of his jacket. Am I right? It's not written down anywhere.
No.
Literally the only translation we had of it, reference to it, was the design character sheet that said Hive/host capture force, right?
That was it, yeah.
It's written in files in Gun Survivor 2.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Forgot about that.
I think you're right. I think it is the Special Forces, but because the rival company have never been given a proper name, I think that's why they're called HCF in the file in 7, because that's the only sort of label, if you like, we've ever had to identify them.
It'd be interesting to know if we ever get why Wesker defected in the first place, especially if the timelines match up to when we've got this discovery of the so far unnamed fungus. And did Wesker have any involvement with its discovery and subsequent research? Why he went to Tricell?
It's very possible, because the fungus was discovered when Wesker was with them, and obviously the technical assistance was done in 2000, and at some point the rival company left the programme, so the connections, as they're called, are the ones who created Eveline, and now for whatever reason the rival company have become Umbrella, and now Umbrella want Eveline back, so they need to explain all that.
And that's who attacked the ship.
Well, no one attacked the ship, it was just the storm, but she was moved because they thought she was going to get abducted by rival organisations, yeah.
Yes.
When I remember originally playing it, it felt like, why have they taken so long to find her? But I think they knew where she was. They actually realised it was a safer, given what had happened nearby, it was a safer thing to leave her there to avoid being captured by other companies. Am I correct in that understanding?
Well, we don't really know, but the implication is because Eveline was loose on the Baker farm, she was too dangerous to approach, so that's why they've got in contact with Lucas, and he's given them progress reports. From the trailer, he seems to have set up this lab in the mines himself, and he's been experimenting on the mould, so there's quite a lot they've got to explain, and obviously on top of all that they have to explain Chris's newfound allegiance to this new Umbrella as well.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That is a lot for one game, and certainly one DLC of one game.
2 really, they can put a little bit more in the other one, but yeah, it's mostly just Not a Hero. That's a lot. I suspect we're going to be walking away with more questions than answers. I'm just putting it out there.
Probably.
It seems a lot.
End of Zoe, the promotional picture, you see a fleet of helicopters in the background, so whether that's relevant or not, I don't know.
I do wonder, because of Umbrella Corps, for all its rubbishness, did introduce a hell of a lot of different organisations as part of this Umbrella Corps program. So there's like Shenyar and loads of others. Is it feasible that any of them could be the rival organisation?
I don't think so, because the rival organisation is Umbrella now. It's a continuation of the plotline from Resident Evil 4 where Wesker wanted to resurrect Umbrella.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering whether they would, rather than think of a different company, they'll just go, well, it was Shenyar all along.
Possibly, but then Heavenly Island, you've got this new Umbrella Corporation selling weapons to Shenyar, so it's doubtful they're the same organisation.
Okay, it might make it
I think that's part of the reason why they axed all that stuff in Umbrella Corps, because they didn't want to make it too complicated before 7, once they actually knew where 7 was going. Perhaps
I'm expecting a big kind of plot twist of a dum-dum-dum, oh my god, the rival organisations, it's been Will Farmer all this time, I don't know. It's probably just going to be something completely new, and everyone's just going to go, okay.
As long as it's answered, I don't care.
I just don't want it to be the same old cliche that we've talked about, especially with the animated movies, but like the general, like, here's the rotational bad guy for this situation, and their motivation is the same greed motivation, and like, we release a virus and then blah, blah, blah. Ugh. Just be the same shit.
Yeah. And Ada's storyline's always quite complicated. This is also going to be the same organisation that Ada was working for during Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that might...
And 4.
And 4, yeah. So there might be some hints here about Ada's role and motivations as well. So that could be a little surprise.
Possibly, yeah. But like you said, it's a hell of a lot they've got to explain what essentially is going to be a 45-minute DLC. So whether they do or not, who knows?
Rumour, Remake 2 is apparently going to be in third person. That's the rumour going around. Information supposedly released by an inside source said that there was credible information about how new characters for the fighting game Injustice 2, he leaked that as well, which was verified as being correct. Information posted by a user on Biohaze suggests Remake 2 isn't in first person, though there is a first person option hidden in the debug menu. Going down a dead aim route, I really feel. I think the rumour is that they haven't decided which is the best kind of
Perspective.
Thank you very much. At the moment, until they've completed more of the game, whether it's going to be like a bonus mode at the end, a bit like Code Veronica, which had that kind of first-person battle mode at the end, didn't it? Whether they're going to do that or going back to the third person. Purists out there will be going, well, that's great that it's in third person, but does that mean it's over the shoulder, or is it going to be fixed camera angles? That we do not know.
It's not going to be pre-rendered at the very least.
No.
Wasn't there also another rumor about the scenario being only...
Yes, that's the other rumour. No A and B scenarios any longer.
That's going to be interesting to see what they handpick from all 4 scenarios.
Well, that makes it interesting. I was thinking about it because Resident Evil 2 has always been a bit of a... There's no real defined route. It's a bit of everything, isn't it? A bit like Resident Evil 1.
In the early days, it seemed more defined to be Claire A, Leon B, but as the years have gone on, that's become more and more blurry.
It has.
So,
The key events are still Claire A, Leon B, but there are elements from all 4 scenarios. It's not as black and white as Claire A, Leon B, and that's it.
The danger for me is if they just take any inspiration from Darkseid.
I was just saying they've got to be careful in some things. Sort of things like Death's Door is directly linked, isn't it, to what the scenario is from Umbrella Chronicles. Fourth Survivor as well, maybe. And the retrieval of the G-Virus sample and conflicting information in perhaps the archive. And things like that. So
there's obviously bits that we know that they have to hit, like the stuff with Sherry, like that originally came from Claire A, that all has to be consistent to what's come in other games like Resident Evil 6 afterwards, which I guess makes certain things easier than others. But yeah, it'd be very interesting to watch that mashup. I was going to say, I think there was a discussion that was blamed on the development time trying to get it done. It's just like, I start thinking about the scope of like games now, and it's just like, and the time since they announced it, I think it's almost been as long as Capcom had originally on the entirety of development of the original Resident Evil 2, including 1.5. So to put that in perspective, and also probably the same for Remake, the original GameCube version Remake, the development time on that was a couple of years, if that.
But Capcom, to my knowledge, Rob, don't have any sort of overheads in a way that like DICE would with Electronic Arts, do they? So surely they can just take their time and just release it whenever.
Yeah, they've got no pressure to get it. I think it would really come down to management and shareholders' expectations. The management will come down to how much they've got as far as games to release that year and what they're expecting to be big releases. Because obviously most companies try to have at least 1 or 2 big releases a year, and Capcom's no different in that respect. But other than that, no, they don't set a date usually and go, we're going to get it out by this date. They just kind of announce it and say, I mean, Resident Evil 7 is a perfect example of that. They didn't announce a date until quite near the end of development, and then literally showed it at E3, and it was out the following January, which is pretty big. We know that was in development for a long time, so...
That does conclude the news, so we now move on to our main discussion of this podcast, which is our B.O.W. special.
It was during these 3 years that our research moved up to the 2nd level. It was at this point that we fixed upon the idea of making a living biological weapon. We started to call the T-virus by a new name, Zombie. However, it was impossible to get a 100% infection ratio. Within people, there is a subtle difference that the virus couldn't totally overtake. It seems compatibility was also a major factor. About 10% of the people who were injected with the zombie virus didn't get infected. And this was something that, no matter how hard we researched, we just couldn't overcome. A disease that would affect 90% of all humans seemed to me to be quite an effective weapon. But Spencer didn't see it that way. Spencer said he was hoping for a specialty virus that could easily wipe out everyone. But why in the world would he want something like that? One important characteristic of biological weapons was that they could be developed cheaply. However, the biological weapon that we were researching started to become very costly. If Spencer was in it just for the money, then he probably wouldn't have chosen to spend the extra money on researching a specialty virus that infected and wiped out 100% of its victims. It just wasn't financially worth it. Why would he want to ignore all financial concerns just to continue the research? If by changing the idea of war through biological warfare, he was attempting to monopolize all military industries, then I would have understood that. But even to this day, I have no idea what his true intentions were.
So, in terms of the podcast today, we've got a discussion on B.O.Ws, which of course have been the staple of the Resident Evil series since its very inception. Without B.O.Ws, there wouldn't be a Resident Evil. Without the humble zombie turning his head in the first game, where would this game series be? Nowhere. We've had all sorts of B.O.Ws over the years. It started off, I suppose, with the human aspect, and gradually, certainly with Resident Evil 1, we started seeing plant, fish, birds, and then Resident Evil 2 took it to new chapters, and Outbreak 2 I'll put in a special nod there for the infected zoo, and Resident Evil 0 was very much like a bugs and quite a primitive B.O.W collection, and then it all went to hell Resident Evil 4 onwards. There was science behind the classic games. Crap science, yes, but science, there was sense. And then the introduction of the Plagas, certainly will be a curtailing point in this podcast, no doubt, created cave trolls and other Lord of the Rings inspired creatures. Some good, some bad, and it's kind of gone on from there. And I feel Resident Evil 7 brought it back somewhat to a bit of normality, but that's just a personal opinion. So what we thought with this podcast was to kind of go through what everyone thinks been the most successful B.O.W, and by that I'm talking about their effectiveness in the field, in the battle arena. How well would they actually work for their intended purpose? And we've got quite a lot of information through supplementary material such as Wesker's Report 2 as to what the original intentions were behind the products they were selling, and of course we've got hints to Dead Aim and buyers bidding on particular B.O.Ws and the like. And Umbrella Chronicles, of course, having the factories and the storage facilities in the Russian base. So there's lots to kind of get through. I wanted to start with one of the favourite B.O.Ws, and perhaps the first proper B.O.W encounter in Resident Evil is the Hunter. All the creatures up to the point of encountering the Hunter in the first game have been almost secondary infectants to an extent. So the crows and the dogs and the humans to that extent. But it's when you first come across that Hunter, that quality video as you're exiting the guardhouse. So you've just gone through all hell on earth with plants and sharks and God knows what, and then you're encountered by these green humanoid reptilian beasts, and that's the Hunter. And it's strange, isn't it, because it's so different to what you've encountered before, and yet it felt right. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of the earlier games and B.O.Ws. It still felt within the science of Resident Evil. So there's a bit of a rant there, but there we go. So the first Hunter that came out was actually the MA120, which is only referred to in the Resident Evil 2 N64 edition in the X-Files. Oddly, it's not mentioned in Wesker's Report 2, but we do get the history of the 121 Alpha, how it was created through reptilian DNA injected into human embryos with the T-virus as well. As I said, we started with the 120. We don't need to dwell on the 120. We never see it. Or do we? Do we see it in Resident Evil 2?
To be honest, if you're talking about in terms of pure game development, it is just the Resident Evil 1 Hunter model, and it's just literally laid on the floor in the room.
That's a connective tissue for people who'd never played a Resident Evil game, like who only had a Nintendo 64. So obviously it also had to prep them for the then planned release of Zero.
Yes. So we'll start then with the MA121 Alpha, which is the reptilian Hunter that's appeared in Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Survivor, Umbrella Chronicles.
And obviously just the remake.
Yes, that was
And,
Pride, I think.
Revelations, I think, is this hunter as well, isn't it? In the Terra Grigia section.
Is that the alpha model?
I think so. I don't think it's implied to be anything different, is it? It's not a mass-produced one from Code Veronica or anything. It's the same model as the remake.
Yeah.
There's no files in Revelations which imply it's anything different.
No.
The 121 was the first mass-produced hunter. Highly
Yes.
versatile it was, and I think all subsequent models were based on that one.
Except for what's the one in 3? Looks like a frog.
Oh,
The Gamma. I think we reminisce a lot about the Hunter. I think there's a general consensus, certainly amongst us as podcasters, that the original Hunter in Resident Evil 1 is still the most deadly. No other Hunter seemingly quite got to that level of holy shit, as he does that kind of leap of death and off goes your head at full power or whatever.
Exceptionally unpredictable, yeah. Getting tag teamed.
It's heartbreaking watching them be so dumbed down to the point in Revelations where you're just literally punching them to death. It's absolute nonsense. I mean, going up against a hunter in the original with your knife was
Foolish. As I said, it was so different to what you'd encountered before. Even, the snake moved relatively slowly, where the hunters were jumping around, leaping about. It took, some time to kind of get a fix on it. But Wesker's Report 2 was interesting because it went into a lot of history about the creation elements of it and the intent, if you like, of being able to send in these bioorganic weapons. And it was the first real success that the Arclay facility had.
Apparently it was based on a concept to attack enemies who were armed with antivirus equipment, and because it had intelligence and it could understand orders, it was called Hunter because they were literally good at hunting in packs. Wesker's Report 2 says that it was the early 80s when they started work on the project, but because William Birkin went a bit mental because Alexia Ashford at the time was emerging as his big competitor, a lot of the research was wasted because Birkin was becoming very careless. And I think the Hunter program was temporarily suspended, which explains a little bit why they probably didn't come into the fore until the late 1990s.
Yeah, you're right. There is a big gap in the development of the program.
I'm going to say, isn't there a file, and I remember this as a good bit of foreshadowing, there's one of the researcher assistant files is talking about the skinned gorilla thing that was playing with its food.
Yeah.
And I assume that's always supposed to have been a hunter based on the original concept art anyway, where you could see kind of like a skin vein kind of thing going on. Yeah, I thought that was really good foreshadowing because you have no idea what the hell it's referencing until you see the hunters and you go, oh.
Oh, see, that's interesting. I always thought it was a primary.
Well, see, that's the thing that's always been a little bit out to debate, but the description kind of more matches a hunter, and as a research thing, it seems relatively recent, which would imply that, again, maybe it's only brought up again in the mid-90s.
I think one of the developers did clarify. I think Welsh was the one who asked, and it was confirmed to be a hunter, yeah.
I think it's the Resident Evil Survivor and the B.O.W. report that first kind of says how these are created with a kind of reptilian element. I don't think the Survivor got it right, though. Didn't it just say directly injecting the DNA? Certainly in the UK translation, directly injecting the T-virus into human DNA randomly creates hunters.
I think they were just using the genetic information of various reptiles and using the T-virus to alter the gene structure or whatever. I think they were using reptiles because they wanted to create something that developed hardened, ridged skin like a crocodile to act as like a natural armor plating against guns and whatnot.
So, as I said, they appear in multiple games. They're released in Zero as well by, Marcus releases them, I think.
It's probably another discussion, really, but it's never really clear where exactly they come from in Zero.
Yes, that's true. The first game, it's Wesker that releases them, and that's in the courtyard. He brings them in, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Am I imagining it that there are pods that they were in?
Well, you see some sort of broken animal cages in one of the rooms in Marcus's lab, but that's about it.
Yeah.
There's speculations that were taken there by the investigation teams, but that doesn't really make any sense.
No. But as I said, they were one of the first mass-produced models. We see them, they obviously got shipped over to Sheena Island as well. I don't think there's any evidence of them being produced on Sheena Island, as that tend to be this kind of tyrant plant, but they were there and relatively effective. Anyone have any particular horror stories of hunters from their playthroughs over the years?
I've been tag teamed. That's probably the worst, other than having had your head swiped off. Especially the original come up from the basement and then the Kenneth hallway, and there's two of them in there, and if they both get your attention, they come running up from down the end of the hallway up to the double doors at the end, and will literally get into an alternate swiping attack. So one hits you, the other one hits you. One hits you, the other one hits you. There's nothing you can do. You're dead. It's happened to me twice.
I think that room's always had 2 in it, but I think in the director's cut somewhere has 3, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That particular
I think it's got spiders in the director's
Yeah,
cut.
spiders, yeah.
I think the hunters have been moved to the dog hallway on the outside where the spiders are in the original version. But I can't remember which room's got 3, but I know one of them has 3. One of them's far off. Is it the hallway beside it where the jewel and the greenhouse and stuff might have 3? There's 2 in the hallway, but one's hidden in the nook towards
It jumps out, as you go down.
That's the one I think has 3. But that's okay, because at least you can attack the other 2 with that one not coming out until it jumps out, because it gives you a fright.
It was always the scariest thing when you were doing a no-save run.
That's what I was about to get to. Surely they'd be the curse of a no-save run.
Because a green fine decapitation was not uncommon.
Yes. And as we said earlier, they've never really been as effective as they were in that game.
I mean, being brutally honest, the reason why they are so unfair is because they're quite broken. You can't shoot them during certain animations. You can only shoot them on the ground if you shoot them during the aerial attack. Then you can get a free shot on them on the ground. So it's more of like the age of the game, I think, which is what lends them the difficulty. It would be nice if they'd kept that ferocity in remake, because they were really dumbed down in the remake, I thought.
Well, I suppose the remake had Crimson Heads as well to kind of counteract perhaps any dumbing down or fixing of the brokenness. You could kind of, they're kind of halfway house between the two. So as I said, that was always the base model going forward. And what follows on from the Hunter 121 really is a deviation of the research. So Umbrella Europe continued with their research and developed the 121 beta. Wesker was successful in retrieving the combat data of the 121 from the mansion incident, and that was then flogged off to said rival corporation.
Sorry, I think the beta was Umbrella America, the one with all the tumours on.
Yes, the one from Resident Evil 3, the kind of purpley type.
Yeah, that was an American one, and the Hunter Gamma, the amphibian one, was Umbrella Europe, I think.
Thank you for the correction. Always useful to know. And as I said, the rival organisation made the Hunter 2. We'll take them each in turn. We'll start with the beta. I was always disappointed with the beta. I remember very distinctly playing Resident Evil 3, and then you get that cutscene in the hospital, because that's when they turn up with Carlos, and it's all very quiet, and you're like, what the hell? And then you just hear the noise, that kind of whoosh, and you're like, oh shit. Bear in mind, you haven't seen a Hunter for a long, long time in the kind of gaming world. You've had Resident Evil 1, Director's Cut, 2, you've gone through all this, and you're like, oh shit, they're back. Of course, Jill's back, Hunter's back. Naturally. And it just didn't live up to the same. The beta was really disappointing. I think it was more sound-based, I think, if I remember correctly.
I think there's a little bit of story in there as well, though, because I think it is explained that they were defective because of the tumours they have all over them, and I don't think they're meant to be quite as powerful as the base 121 model. But from a gameplay perspective, that's an odd decision to make, because you'd think they'd want to make a more powerful one.
Or at least the same.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever being troubled by the betas, but I think part of me also took that down to the fact that by this point I was playing with Carlos with an assault rifle.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Which I don't think helped.
There is one particular room, I think it's in the upper levels of the hospital, the room where you meet Nikolai in, and as soon as you walk in, the way the camera angle is, you can't see anything, and you can hear at least 2 of them. As soon as you come in the door, they can see you, and they're coming at you straight away.
You hear the thunk, 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 thunk.
Yeah.
Running across the room or leaping.
Could they do a decap?
They did in cutscene, but it was censored, wasn't it?
Yes, but this is about part of that whole censored situation. I think they were probably planned to do decaps, and they took it out because of that same reason they changed that cutscene. Because the Japanese version, I think the Japanese version is censored only because it was the Japanese version, and then there was a planned version of it uncensored for the US, and then they ended up changing their mind and censoring it again. I think that's my memory of it, which is why it was a late-minute change, which is why it's still kind of, it does a decap, but the head stays attached, and there's like the sound of blood coming out, like a head had been removed.
Oh, there we go. But I'm sure you could adopt a different tactic to them. I'm sure that if you were quiet or didn't run, they tend to react more to your sound of your footsteps than other hunters. I think that in theory. I can't remember.
I definitely remember that of the Gamma.
Well, that's
probably because they're blind. I think they've got no eyes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, we can come on to the Gamma. Going back to the beta, it's only ever appeared in Resident Evil 3. We've never seen it again. Yes, that's
I was going to
cool.
say, story-wise, sorry, you were talking about the tumours and stuff. It almost smacks of like a level of desperation, like the situation in Raccoon had gotten out of control, and they're like, well, we've got these slightly defective models, but I guess they're still viable.
Yeah.
Let's just
Let's
put
see
them
what,
out.
yeah, see how they go. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe. So at the same time, Umbrella Europe shipped in the 124 Gammas. The hunters, and you encounter them fairly quickly after the betas, if we're honest, in Raccoon Park. They've subsequently appeared in the Outbreak games, colloquially known as Frogger. These have always been, I think, again, quite poor hunters. Clearly, when they were being created, they injected a lot of amphibian DNA as perhaps necessarily a reptilian DNA. I think it's always been a bit contentious as to whether it's reptilian or amphibian for the main hunters, or a bit of both. But clearly, with the Froggers, we've got a lot more amphibian DNA, because they do resemble giant frogs, or humanoid type frogs, but not on the same level as the lurker. Now, this has never ever happened to me, but you can be engulfed by them. They don't have a decap, but they have a swallow.
Yeah, it's happened to me.
Has it? Oh, okay.
Where you're crossing the little bridge with Jill in the park. I remember stopping once just to look at the scenery, if you like, because it's like it's quite attractive camera angle back in the day. And then one of them just jumps out of the water, and if you're too close to it, yeah, it's a one-hit kill.
Interesting, because lurkers could do it as well in Zero. They could swallow you with their tongues.
You can be way across from them, and if they grab you in the tongue and you don't break out of it, they just drag you straight in.
I think the lurkers were, again, considered a failure by Umbrella, because unless they were near a water source, they were pretty useless for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And they've turned up again in Darkside Chronicles. Javier Hidalgo bought a load, because obviously they'd be quite effective in the flooding Amazon River.
Yes, and they also appeared in... They did appear in Darkside Chronicles as well, making I'm guessing a canonical appearance in the sewers of Resident Evil 2. We weren't sure, but overall I thought the Froggers were poor, but they were in the hospital as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
In those two tanks. Is it implied that Umbrella Europe put them in there at some point?
I think they were captured by hospital staff.
They were attacking them, and somebody shot them with some sort of tranquilizer dart, and then they dragged them and put them into tanks.
Is that the canon? As translated from a Chinese drama album.
It's probably something to do with the fact that they were trying to create a T-virus vaccine down there.
Yeah, fair cool, actually.
Yeah, I'll let them off.
Yeah.
Yes,
It obviously
yeah.
got too bad. And it being a hospital, too, it kind of makes sense.
Umbrella Europe was on the scene by the 28th when the Nemesis came in, so there's quite a few days for something like that to happen. But I don't know whether you could be swallowed whole. In Outbreak, I used to run. I couldn't be bothered with them all the time. I just getting out of it. But I don't know if the swallowing mechanism was prevalent in the Outbreak games as well.
Yeah, it can ruin a decisions playthrough.
Oh, can it? Oh, can
Yeah.
they? Okay.
Bastard things are.
Which tells you that they're perhaps a little bit more effective than we give them credit for.
Yeah, there we go. I stand corrected.
I didn't like their design revision in Outbreak though.
They were a little bit smaller, weren't they?
Yeah.
They had much bigger throats. They were even more frog-like than because the ones in Resident Evil were quite gooey, weren't they? They looked a bit like more humanoid. Yeah, in Outbreak they were a bit more froggy. So at some point in Raccoon City we had the MA125R and the Hunter Mew. I don't think there's a lot of difference between them. The Hunter Mew was just a smaller version of the 125R, and I barely remember seeing them in End of the Road, whatever the last chapter was called.
Yeah, I think they were created for training purposes for the T103, because they had the battle zone thing with the red laser beams.
The 125R looks really cool with its spines.
Yeah, again, it was an intermediate challenge, I felt. It wasn't as good as the 121. It was smaller than the 121. But it does create an interesting point for the Remake 2, whether they introduce them in Birkin's lab, or at least a frozen one or a thawed out one, dead one on the floor.
I'm not trying to be incredibly negative, but I don't think there'll be any Outbreak references in 2 Remake, unfortunately.
That'd grind my gears if they didn't. But I would like to see a dead 125R Hunter in Remake 2. But there we go. Yeah, there was lots of them, and I think it's quite an effective mechanism in below freezing point, wasn't it? When you first go there's quite a few of them all frozen. And when you quickly realise that you've got to defrost the lab, you're going, I don't really want to defrost the lab. I'm quite happy with it being this cold. But yeah, I thought they were quite effective, but they didn't present the challenge that the original did. So what we'll do now, we'll talk about the Hunter 2s and its subspecies, the Sweeper. So this was interesting because these were directly created as a result of what Wesker had acquired from the Mansion incident, which was developed by the rival organisation. And the main improvement on the Hunter 2 was the fact that it would react to the drones that were sent into Rockford Island. And if you activated a drone, then the Hunter was programmed to come to where that drone was. Obviously a bit of a gameplay mechanism as well, but in terms of a B.O.W, I thought that was an extremely effective and clever as an actual weapon to be used in warfare.
I was going to say, I think the Hunter 2s are probably the next most vicious version of the Hunters in the franchise as well, so those two things kind of work very well.
They were tough, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. They take a lot of damage, and they can dish out a reasonable amount, and they can do the decap, but not really an official decap because it was censored, but they can leap at you and kill you in one hit if you've got any damage. I have had one of them ruin a no-save run on Code Veronica a couple of times.
That must take forever.
Well, you get the one save in the middle, though.
Yeah, the one save in the middle, yeah. Post Tyrant fight.
But as I said, I think if you're thinking about its practical use in the long term, I think that would have been quite a good, especially if you're kind of going a bit sleuthy with your war zone. You could set these drones up to monitor and almost act as like a security guard to an extent, which I thought was quite a cool a twist, if you like, on the original, and one that I think would actually have practical purposes in the real world. At the same time, we also had the Sweeper, which I thought was actually more effective than the Hunter 2. It's officially categorized as a subspecies, although it's pretty identical in its official appearance in the artwork. It's just almost like a recolored purple one. But actually the in-game model, and this is quite prevalent in Survivor 2, is notably different from the Hunter 2. It seems to have quite a thin face, and it was almost like elongated, so it looks a bit like almost like a hammerhead shark, I always thought. But the beauty of the Sweeper was that if you were slashed by it, it had venom secreted onto its claws. So not only would you be, in theory, infected by maybe the virus, but you would also be poisoned by it as well, which I thought was, again, a practical application of a B.O.W weapon. I always had theories that the venom would be secreted out of its skin and then it ran down onto its claws as opposed to it kind of coming out of its claws like a snake. I don't think they were like glands. I just think it was just permanently secreting toxins, and so it was always covered in it. And of course the Sweeper acted as a first boss in Survivor 2, two of them. I can't even remember where you encountered the Sweepers in Code Veronica.
The worst part for me is when Steve's in the plane and Claire's got to sort of take the long route back round, and you take the cargo lift up to the front of the training facility and you come out in the front yard where the grave digger is. I think there's 3 of them there.
Yeah. You have to run, trying to get through. You're more likely to get hit by one of them depending on which way you take, because of course you hear them going thump, 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 and then jump.
Yeah.
And if they jump and catch up to you quickly, they can catch up to you quite quickly.
But yeah, I think aesthetically there wasn't much difference to them, but certainly a huge improvement over the 121 from a B.O.W point of view, and I'm not sure Umbrella ever got close to it.
Well, that's why Umbrella scrapped it.
But it took a couple of years later. I mean, what Code Veronica, we're talking, 1998, so in the space of, between July and December 98, this rival corporation had improved the 121 quite significantly.
I know Umbrella attempted a few more models, but I think it's stated in Darkside Chronicles that because the Hunter 2 and Sweeper were so successful, that Umbrella basically scrapped the Hunter program completely and tried to come up with the Anubis as a successor.
Yes. They're the main, I suppose, more traditional ones. We then got a couple from Dead Aim. It was the next appearance by the Hunter, which was the Hunter Elite, which was considered the premium Hunter model, which was being sold by Umbrella in 2002 to the highest bidder. I thought they were shit, but they were big. They were the biggest ones.
They were fast.
They were fast and they were big, but they never decapped.
They could always sort of like dash from side to side and almost like dodge your gunfire, couldn't they? If I'm remembering right.
Yeah, there'll be always quite a few of them as well. Yeah, they'll be quite hard to dodge, wasn't they? But what's interesting is that, because that was considered the Hunter Elite, but then afterwards we had the Hunter Delta, which was in Umbrella Chronicles. That always proved a bit of contention as to what they were, because the only real official picture of the Hunter Delta comes in the prelude to the full comic, because the hunters that appear in Umbrella's End are the same model to that of what's appeared in the Mansion Incident, Zero and whatnot, but of course they were different as indicated in the manga. We don't quite know what they actually did and how they were different, because they don't act any different in Umbrella's End than they do in the rest of the game.
I think in the comic they look slightly larger than a regular Hunter.
Right.
Obviously in the game they've just used the MA121 Alpha model
Yeah. So we can't really say much about the Delta, but it's interesting that the Delta came after the Elite, at least in terms of the game.
They were stored in that hangar for God knows how long, so could have easily have come before. We don't know for sure.
We don't know. Going back to Dead Aim, we also had the Glimmer, which was considered to be a subspecies of the Hunter as well, which I'm presuming more of a subspecies of the Frogger. They were little assholes, just jumping around like little frogs. And they had an interesting tactic of spewing up on you, as opposed to necessarily attacking you in any meaningful manner. But they were considered as a failed B.O.W, which is why they are on Benthic Island in the first place. They just pissed me off. I don't know about you, but it's like, go away. And there's so many of them, wasn't there? There's quite a few. It was hard to get rid of them. Right, that's that Hunter. What's left? We've got Revelations, haven't we?
The Farafellow's just a standard MO121 with the T-Abyss virus, which has just made it transparent, similar to deep-sea organisms, I think, to make it look invisible. I think that's the idea behind it.
And it's a shame because, in theory, the invisibility thing should make it the most deadly. I felt in the game it had quite a big build-up and quite a good build-up when you're going around as Quentin, whatever his name is, and you don't know what's going on, and there's a bit of a mystery about it, and you see the kind of CCTV, and it's like, oh, what the hell? It had a good build. And then when you do encounter them, it's just mainly because of the game. It was just tedious, wasn't it?
Yeah, it could have been a really good horror set piece, but it's just, you've got so much ammo at that point that it's just not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they had that paused attack, didn't they? Where their claws are open, and it's like, well, I'll shoot you now then, shall I? It just wasn't particularly challenging, and they were a lot spikier, weren't they? And as you said, and invisible. So a sad demise. And then finally, as Batswell mentioned, the Anubis B.O.W, which was supposed to be marketed as the successor to the Hunter program. These are they're more dog-like, weren't they? Which is why they got the Anubis name. Spindly little things that used to jump around. I'll be honest, I'd probably need to play Darkside Chronicles again just to appreciate them more, because the problem in those games is that you're just there to shoot and kill them, You're not worried about your ammo necessarily and shoot them up. If it moves, you kill it type thing. Whereas I think in the actual normal games, you're a bit more appreciative of creatures like that. You're like, okay, I'll save my ammo, but there we go.
I think the idea behind that was it had all its internal organs removed, so it was lighter and more agile. But the downside was it could be easily be killed because it had no thick skin.
Did the Jabberwock come from a Bandersnatch?
With the T. Veronica virus, wasn't it? You're right, the Bandersnatch was a kind of failed tyrant program based on the T virus, and the Jabberwock S3 was based on the Bandersnatch but with the T. Veronica virus.
Right, cool.
Any final thoughts on the Hunters? Overall success? Would like to see them return?
To be honest, I can take them or leave them now because we've had them so often. They're definitely at the strongest with fixed camera angles, I think. Yeah. Over the shoulder, third person just makes them too easy.
So I'd imagine from a war point of view, quite a relatively successful B.O.W. Certainly the Hunter 2 would probably all agree was probably the most successful, and obviously in-game as well, if what you're saying is right with the abandonment of the Hunter program because the Hunter 2 was so successful, then I'd imagine a fairly low cost. Not as unethical as perhaps other B.O.Ws. We're not exactly kidnapping children from Africa. We just want your embryos. So not too bad.
And so, after 10 long years, our research finally reached the third stage. To create a living biological weapon that was a soldier, that would follow strict orders, obey its program, and have intelligence. It was the so-called Tyrant, basically a monster that we set out to create. However, there was a major obstruction to our research back then. Finding a basic body for Tyrant. The biggest problem was that suitable bodies for Tyrant were, at that time, genetically very limited. The source of the problem lay in the nature of the T-virus. The T-virus mutation used to create zombies and hunters could be used on just about any human, but it would also cause a decline in the subject's brain capacity. If the subject didn't have a certain amount of intelligence, then it couldn't function as a tyrant. Birkin tried solving the problem by picking out new mutagens that would keep down the wear and tear on the subject's brain, so long as the subject fit the tyrant profile. However, the number of people that had suitable genetics to accept the tyrant cells were very limited. In a genetic analysis simulation, it was found that only 1 in 1 million had the genetic makeup to become a tyrant. Any other person would merely become a regular zombie. If we could have continued with our research, then I'm sure we could have found a way to make a different type of T-virus that could change more people into tyrants. However, in order to do that research, we first needed people that were perfectly suitable for the new mutation. The odds of us being able to bring one of those few people living in America that fit the profile was extremely low. In the end, the only thing they were able to do was to, by force, bring a few close contenders in from other labs. Even before we had the chance to start our research, it seemed we had already hit an obstacle. At that time, I heard a rumor about another location in Europe, where they had already reached the third level of producing a living biological weapon, using a method that no one had thought of. It was known as the Nemesis Plan. In order to change the stagnant working pace and conditions, I took it upon myself to get a sample of one of the subjects from that plan. Of course, Birkin first disagreed with me, but in the end I was able to get him to reconsider. Everyone had no choice but to recognize the fact that, until we found a suitable tyrant subject, our research wasn't going anywhere. The package from Europe came at midnight, several days later, after a series of broadcasts, proposals, and counter-proposals. That box that contained it landed on the helicopter pad. It read, Nemesis Prototype. I had to use some very strong tactics to get the incomplete thing where it was being researched in France. But all the while, Spencer was backing me up, pulling all of his strings and using his influence. Only Birkin showed no interest in it until the end, but he at least recognized it as an important part of the experiment. The sample was developed to create a never-before-seen, totally new form. By manipulating genes, they had artificially created a living parasite. That was what Nemesis really was. It could latch onto another organism's brain, and then take control of the host's brain, bringing it a high level of destructive power. By combining intelligence with a destructive body suitable for battle, they were able to form the ultimate biological weapon. And if they could complete the project, then they would be capable of creating warlike bodies without having to worry about the intelligence issue. However, the problem was that the parasite containing it was not stable. The only thing written within the document that was attached to the sample was, failure, sample died, over and over again. Anything that had been affected and whose intelligence was being controlled would die within 5 minutes. We all understood that messing around with the incomplete prototype was very dangerous. If we could only somehow manage to extend the amount of time that the hosts would live, then we could take control over the project. That was what I was aiming for.
We will now switch our attention to the Tyrant program. It goes without saying that the Tyrant program has been the linchpin of the series when it comes to bosses. And even non-Tyrant have always had a Tyrant-like feature. I'm thinking Birkin, things like that. He's not, he's not a Tyrant per se, but you can't help but compare the two. Now, this is interesting because Tyrants have, in my opinion, have changed enormously going back from the original. So the first actual Tyrant that was developed was the Proto-Tyrant, or the T-001, which we see in Resident Evil 0. And they all seem to suffer from the same problem in firstly finding a host, and Batman will correct me on the numbers, it's 1 in 10 million?
Yeah.
Yes, good. 1 in 10 million has compatible genes that upon injection of the T-virus would not mutate into a zombie but would mutate into something far stronger. Something that's been prevalent, of course, in the series throughout with, I'm thinking about Albert Wesker here and the Wesker children and whatnot. But yes, so the first one that was created in the Arklay Mountain facility, although not directly referred to, is implied that it is the Proto-Tyrant as opposed to the TW2. It had all the familiar traits of a fairly pale skin and, of course, the exposed heart, which certainly is the Achilles heel of all Tyrants, and continued to be right up until the introduction of the limiter coat. But even then, that didn't necessarily save it. The Proto-Tyrant, I think, was crap. It wasn't even, of course, the main boss in Resident Evil 0. It didn't take a lot to kill it, It wasn't a particularly intense boss fight. We'll scrap it. We'll go on to the TW2 because that's the first successful Tyrant, I think. It was heralded as a masterpiece of human evolution by Wesker, so much so that he was going to use it and the B.O.W. data that he was going to acquire from it. I think he anticipated someone from STARS reaching the laboratory, and that was going to be his way into this rival organisation that we have yet to hear anything about. This one, of course, was in the cryo tube, responded to programming, was able to specifically respond to a request to impale Wesker and then turn on someone else. It was very difficult to knock down, and of course it had the function of being able to mutate, although the TW2 didn't really mutate that much comparatively to other Tyrants. What did everyone think of the first Tyrant?
It was great, but again, I think it was more terrifying in the very first game than it was in the remake. I think the bit where it's just casually walking after you in the lab in remake, it's too easy compared to the same fight in the original game.
The rooftop fight against him's far harder in the original because he's just relentless.
And of course it requires the famous rocket launcher to dispose of. I mean, I'm trying to think from a kind of warfare point of view. This was obviously the model that was used, and this was Umbrella's big project at this point in time. But of course, in the actual official timeline, by that point, they'd already discovered Sergei Vladimir, and they no longer needed necessarily to find the needle in the haystack and the 1 in 10 million, as they're able to clone Sergei 10 times.
Because he was a compatible host, William Birkin used the 10 clones of Sergei to engineer a new strain of the T-virus that practically allowed anybody to become a tyrant through artificial manipulation, which explains why we get so many.
I see, because I liked the good old days of trying to work out which were the Sergei clones. Certainly the Ivans were, though, weren't they?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, isn't it, the Ivans? The fact that they're already established by the time the TW02 is finished, it kind of negates the O2 of all its majesty in the timeline, really.
I was going to say, you can put that down to the fact that they just stopped sharing information with the American side of things, like, because they become untrustworthy of Birkin and so forth. It still fits the project. At Arkley pretty much had become pointless, you know.
Well, I'm not sure though, because the T103 was specifically improved as a result of the combat data of the TW02. Aren't Ivans just modified T103s?
Maybe they're just waiting on that information. I don't know. Maybe that was the final bit in the process. They were waiting for combat. I don't know.
I think they were both in development at the same time, but they weren't going to mass-produced the TO2 until it had its battle test with STARS, and obviously because it was destroyed in the mansion, they just took that data and applied it to the T103 instead. I think the Ivan models were early prototypes, and the T103, the main difference between that and the TO2 was that it had an external power limiter in the form of its trench coat, and it was meant to be like an infiltration thing, wasn't it? It was meant to look human from a distance.
Somewhat, anyway, yeah.
From a distance. Oh, yeah.
Except for when, smashing through walls and that sort of stuff.
I remember in my early youth, I refused to believe that Mr. X, as he was colloquially known, was really a tyrant because he didn't look like the tyrant from the first game. And I was like, it's not really a tyrant, is it? Because he is notably different. But obviously we see what happens. Now, this has always been a debate. If you lose the limiter coat, is that what caused him to mutate? Or did he mutate because he fell into the lava pit?
Well, it's a both. The lava burns the limiter coat off, and then that mutation, I've always assumed, saves it from the lava.
Yeah, that's how the power limiters work. If the tyrant's near death, it disengages its power limiter, which causes the T-virus to mutate again. And that's what turns them into a super tyrant.
I've always loved that idea. It's all a bit silly with limiter coats and stuff, but it just falls on the right side of working.
Well, it does, doesn't it? There's, again, that believable sciencey bit, if you like, behind it. And, of course, would you go as far as saying that the Super Tyrant from Resident Evil 2 is possibly one of the most dangerous?
It's where I got the name from, Nick. That fight is a masterful set piece.
I remember pausing it because he comes out, you're like, right, I'm ready. By the time you think, what shall I do? He's on you. And you're already being slashed at 100 miles an hour. And if you're on full health, you're now down to caution or low. You're like, oh, crap. You just don't have time to even think about what your strategy is going to be because you're too late by then. And it made a mockery of the first Tyrant. You didn't have a lot of space, did you, down in that area? And it was, you're right, it was a great set piece and a superb Tyrant. And the music of it coming out of... it was good graphics at the time, though, as well, wasn't it? I mean, superb.
Yeah, it was.
Yes. Because I never thought he put up much of a fight during the game in his Mr. X form. I always thought it was a bit of a disappointment. And then clearly they were saving it for this boss fight, and that took a hell out of you. Even though you've got a lot of ammo, it was a tricky fight.
That was the thing. He wasn't supposed to be a fight. He was intimidating in the original form.
Yes.
They were saying, making the comment about smashing through the walls. You knock him down in the press room, and then he smashes back through, and you're like, holy crap, he's back again already. Like, those little moments were quite good, and there was good pacing on them too. They were only used when that really matters. And as I said, it's all about the intimidation, and then to turn it around into that at the end, you're just like, wow, that was really impressive. I mean, it's again another one of those elements that made the second game so special.
The 103 was like it was the first time you got to see a Tyrant mass produced in the cutscene with the helicopter dropping them all off.
The tanks, yeah.
And I thought this was one of the first times in the series with Survivor you actually got to see the potential of like spin-offs, because with Survivor we go to Sheena Island to where they're all mass produced. And I think one of the reasons why I've always got a bit of a kick out of Survivor is seeing like the place where all this happens, and just having an island full of Mr. X's that just turn up anywhere.
Yeah.
Obviously a catastrophe's befallen. I was always really enjoyed that element of it.
And as we've talked about before when we've talked about Survivor, just like also the creepy backstory as to how they're being produced as well, just adds that little bit of a sweetener to the already quite crazy situation. It is very good.
I mean, let's be honest, they weren't exactly challenging in Survivor.
No, they weren't.
But that's limitations for like putting that in first person. They kind of had to strike that balance.
I mean, I know we're pretty anti-remake on it, but to see Survivor done, there's some great ideas on it. I know is there one of like a coastal road you can take?
Yes, love that.
And there's a couple of Mr. X's walking along, patrolling the path there, and things like that could be really effective in a better produced title.
There's a great moment where you're in like a little confined alleyway, and it's just walking straight towards you, and there's literally nowhere you can go. You have to put it down before it can reach you.
It starts really far away, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's just slowly walking towards you. It's really cool.
I have a big soft spot for the Hypnos Tyrant.
It looks great.
I mean, first form was a bit shit. Second form was cool. Third form was mind-blowingly awesome. Again, they must have taken the nods, if you like, from Resident Evil 2 and have this kind of build-up. But to have 3 levels of mutation, I thought was quite effective. So the Hypnos Tyrant was designed to be a smaller tyrant, designed again to mimic more human, and certainly the first form tyrant
definitely more towards that line.
Yeah, very human. He wasn't a very happy chap. He always looked a bit sad and forlorn, bless him. But what I always liked, though, was the amount of detail that the files went into as to how this particular tyrant was created, with the beta heteronon-serotonin and the kind of Darwinism with regards to the genealogy of it to create a particularly fierce but humanoid hunter. I think it worked, doesn't it? Because you've got this human thing that had the fallback position of being able to become fierce if damaged. And by the time you get to the third mutation, you've got a kind of jumping tyrant beast thing. Again, it's not difficult in Survivor because of the way the game is, and I think I've seen videos of someone just standing still and all he has to do is move left once because he'll always miss, and then you shoot him. That's not the point. He took a lot. He took, in fact, a helicopter gunship to take him down. So he did well. He did well, in my opinion. Played the part, and it's a shame it wasn't really followed up. Especially in the newer Resident Evils, like a kind of similar Hypnos Tyrant could have been used quite frequently as a kind of like mini kind of boss type scenario. But there we go. So we zip back to Code Veronica, which introduced I don't want to say TO78 because that's not right. Archives kind of correct us all on everything. This was a specialist mass-produced model, so the same as the T103, that was deployed in Rockfort to be used as a training tyrant, and we just happened to encounter the 78th batch number. So there was always a bit of assumption it was a TO78, but it's not. It's just the mass-produced type, the 78th numbered model. What did everyone think of the Code Veronica type?
It was alright. I didn't like the gameplay mechanics where you have to run past where it makes its first appearance, and you can knock it to the floor, and if you try and get past it, it still swings out and hits you. You have to kill it properly.
Well, that's good.
I always found that particular piece of gameplay just quite awkward to do.
But this was interesting because this was a progression almost at the time, because it didn't require the limiter coat. This was Nudie Tyrant that would roam around, and he didn't mutate significantly. He kind of had club-like hands, didn't he? That then the claws kind of came out. And again, it wasn't an end-of-game boss, was it? It wasn't too difficult on the plane.
I always dread that boss fight though, even now. If you've not got the B.O.W. gas rounds or the explosive arrow bolts, you're knackered.
Yeah.
That's just the moment before you get the save point, and if you're doing a Code Veronica's no save run, and I actually got clipped and launched out the plane on one of mine. I was heartbroken.
All that backtracking.
That's so painful.
Well, you have to start the disc from the beginning, Nick. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. So a special place in everyone's heart than the Code.
Reasonably
It's
decent design behind it, though. It looked good.
It did, yes, it did look good. Particularly good.
Just bad gameplay design, that's all.
What we haven't touched upon is Nemesis. The T-103 injected with the Nemesis any alpha parasite, which took the Tyrant to a whole new level. Certainly improved upon the intimidating factor, should we say, of the T-103. And obviously they based the entire game around it, so it has to be fairly successful. It still has the limiter coat. Mutations were a bit more controlled, and certainly the second mutation of Nemesis was easily the hardest, I thought, where its tentacles become even longer and it could kind of play kickabout with you. But I love the Nemesis. I thought it's iconic. It is the first B.O.W. to be able to speak, I think, at that point in time. You can't just beat the end of Resident Evil 3. As cheesy as it is, where she picks up the Magnum.
I've always wanted to know if the whole reason why they wanted it to speak was just so they could use that line. The writer's just like, I've got this I want that action scene kiss-off line, I really want it, and I want it to be topical, so it's going to be this, but in order to make it happen, I've got to have the Nemesis go around going, stars. Then it'll totally play, guarantee you.
But you've got to give the Nemesis credit. What a B.O.W. in terms of its actual ability to be programmed in to only really hunt down specific targets was pretty impressive. And its regenerative ability was equally as impressive. Its mutations were fairly contained, and even after being pulverized by the rail cannon, it still wasn't dead. It was able to use nutrients and tissue of dead T-103s to improve upon itself, and still try and carry out its mission to the very end. What a hero.
The element of the fact that it can inject direct T-virus injections into its targets as well.
From a distance as well.
From a distance as well is another big bonus for its goals.
And who would have thought that would have become a plot point in a future game?
Masterful.
It really was. There was talk whether it was a separate virus, but I think that was a mistranslation, the NET virus, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's in the Western translation of 3, isn't it? But it was only ever meant to be the T virus, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
NET virus, was it?
Yes.
A Nemesis type, I don't know.
And again, they've never been able to do the Nemesis justice afterwards, have they? It appeared in Survivor 2, less said about that better, and obviously it appeared in Umbrella Chronicles, but they've never been able to get the voice right again.
No.
Without it sounding like it's constipated.
They've also had this issue whether or not it's got a robotic overlay or if it's a... Thanks, Paul Anderson. Yeah.
That's the thing, clearly inspired.
Programmed. Oh, it's robotic. It's got a chip in its head or something.
It is dubious how it's able to use weapons and things like that. It wouldn't have been so bad if it was just like wielding a big heavy club or something, but the fact that it knows how to operate a rocket launcher, aim it and fire it is dubious at best.
We're treading into SD Perry territory, aren't we?
Yeah, I think it gets all the more ridiculous, like Paul Anderson allowed him to wield a minigun.
Target specific targets, not just the main target that it's looking for, but like anything that gets in its way, and then it zooms in on the target.
Yeah, the rocket launcher, it just about gets away with it, I think.
Because it can blindly aim it in a general direction and it causes mass damage. I can kind of, I agree.
When it's properly thinking for itself, like taking out helicopters, that's going to allow Jill to escape. It's a bit more. It's pretty vague. Its intelligence, sort of. Its intelligence is never really looked into in any sort of, because a parasite just means it's got a basic form of control, doesn't it? But in terms of actually being issued instructions, or the Nemesis is dubious, but it gets around it by just strong design in terms of from a gameplay point of view.
Yeah. Wasn't there extra information in the Umbrella Chronicles novel with Nemesis?
Yeah, it had a remote camera strapped on it so Wesker could see what it was doing. I think there was some possibility Wesker could send it commands as well, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
It was awful. Moving on, other tyrants we see are the TG virus tyrants in Dead Aim. A bit of hit and miss with that. The first one was pretty poor. TO91 model, which was presumably the 91st model to have been tested with the TG virus. We can only assume. Umbrella having seen the success of the G-Virus, decided, you know what would be really good if we could randomly bring electricity into this. Who knows why? I didn't see any electrical properties in William Birkin, but there you go. T-091 was a complete failure in that sense. It acted as a very poor, slow, tentacle-ridden tyrant that didn't put up any form of fight in dead aim.
Didn't generate the electromagnetic current, which is what they wanted.
Which is what they wanted, exactly. So it was a total failure. I don't know why. Why was it even on?
It was part of the auction, wasn't it, to showcase that they were making tyrants with this new virus.
Right. And then, of course, we have Morpheus injecting himself and becoming T-092, which, for reasons we can only assume to do with his genetics, he became a female tyrant, but a successful tyrant at that, being able to generate his own electromagnetic field, which effectively made him invulnerable to standard gunfire. You have to say you've got to go a long way to find a better tyrant than Morpheus as a product. He could think independently, he could talk, he was impervious to bullets, he retained quite a lot of his humanity, and in his world he was still a thing of beauty, which of course was a running theme with Dead Aim. Surely a contender for best B.O.W. in the series? Yeah, not convinced.
Indifference, it seems.
You never really get to see what doing battle against it without the charged particle rifle would be.
That's true. That's true. And of course, at all times we have a fairly unstable G-Virus, which in the case of Morpheus, if you look at the cutscene very carefully, again, this would benefit from an HD remake, he actually gets to the size of the island.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, it just keeps growing and you can't control it. The form he is at the end is, you can tell, as a G-Virus getting out of control in the system.
Yes, I like that callback to the G5 model, if you like, of Birkin. I thought that was quite a nice nod. So that's always his Achilles heel, I think, the having the G-Virus element contained. There is another tyrant from Damnation, an as of yet unnamed tyrant, clearly based on T-103, but man, what a tyrant.
I think it's safe to say this is the tyrant perfected.
That's a big call.
In terms of just how they are depicted in Damnation, I think it's the most awesome display of power from a monster in the entire series. Mm-hmm. When they're chasing Leon down, it's just impressively good. And I think it's now reached a point of intelligence where it can self-pop its limiter. Because I seem to remember it does it on its own, doesn't it? It doesn't receive too much damage because that's what all the tubes are into it, isn't it? It can actually decide itself when to go nova, if you like.
Go nova.
Yeah.
And very similar to just the standard tyrant, really, wasn't it? The super tyrant from Resident Evil 2, just in a very perfected
much
format.
bigger as well. They've managed to increase the size. Like when it starts like running, the sense of momentum they put in the movie feels it's awesome. It's a really, like, Damnation's not one of my favourite chapters, but when they turn up, I feel the film elevates quite a few steps.
Yes, and it was great to see it in Warfare as well, which we've never seen before.
The only thing that lets that sequence down is a truly invincible Leon.
Standard.
It has become standard. And why everyone was well, not everyone, but a large number of people were like, yay, when we had a non-superhero protagonist in 7.
In terms of tyrants, I can't imagine them ever turning up again now. I think that would probably be it.
Do you think that's it?
Unless they do like a throwback game, obviously they'll be in the remake. But in terms of the timeline and the canon, because I mean, I can't remember how do you pronounce the name? Svetlana.
Svetlana.
Did she get them off the black market?
I think that's the only reason you would continue to see them, is that same kind of, they were being traded around on the black market kind of deals.
But do you ever find out who supplies them to or anything? Is there any other supplement material?
It just says it's a joint project with an unknown organisation.
There you go. I happen to think, though, that the Tyrant program, in terms of Capcom, has been replaced by whatever he's called from Resident Evil 6 and whatever it is in Vendetta. That type of Tyrant type thing. Ustenak, there you go. That's the replacement Tyrant now, isn't it? It's Tyrant all but no, but it doesn't have that organic feel to it much anymore, does it? Especially when he's swinging like a bloody baboon on helicopters. You're like, what the you know, it's just not cricket, is it? And I don't know. I suppose the Tyrant from Vendetta redeemed itself because it kind of looked a bit like Ustenak or Ustenak and Bane. It undid its limiter belt or whatever it's connecting to it, and then consumed old businessman and became quite a typical looking Tyrant, at least, albeit with Anderson-inspired claws. Universal acceptance from the podcast then that the Damnation Tyrants are probably the most effective.
Yeah.
Also
Leon.
the Nemesis. Leon.
No, I was going to say Leon only survives because of a very chance airstrike.
Yeah.
I mean, the Nemesis is a pretty close second, and it does have its tactical advantages for specific targets, let's be honest. If you're going after a specific target, then a Nemesis is obviously very useful. So they'll definitely be the top two.
Top two, yeah. I think I would agree with that. Right, we've looked at the two main families of B.O.Ws that have existed in the Resident Evil series. We now turn over to your wonderful comments on Facebook. I've been very pleased when I've opened the floor up to the field. We asked you guys what was your favourite B.O.W, what do you think is the most effective B.O.W, least effective, and any other comments about particular B.O.W. So I'm just going to kind of read out some of the comments that have been put forward. So we'll start with Nathan Van Ranken. He makes the rather interesting point that the SD Perry B.O.Ws are probably the most effective. Sean, what did you think about that?
Can someone remind me of these?
The tri-squads.
Oh yeah, they're amazing, aren't they? The military units of zombies that can wield machine guns, I seem to remember.
It's like the extension of the B.O.W.
That was the death of the SD. You know, if Trent didn't push me to breaking point, the Tri-Squad certainly ended it for me.
Could I say that apart from the Tri-Squad, there's a lot of, if I can remember correctly, there's quite a good selection of B.O.Ws in Calby & Co.
Caliban.
I think there was another underwater one.
Wasn't there a dinosaur tyrant in one of her books as well, in Underworld?
Oh, so that's where it came from.
Resident Evil 6 Cassie, inspired by Underworld. I can't remember. Probably not the best person to ask, but there we go. So
I
yeah,
thought
thank
you
you.
were the novel guy.
Yeah, you are the best. You are the best person to ask.
Wesker's blood.
So.
I'm sorry.
Still thinking.
Great. So yes, thanks Nathan for that.
I can't disagree with him. I can't remember. He might be completely right. Maybe there is some real original ones in there that are probably the best. I can't even remember.
I do remember that. I think he's right actually. But he caveats that by saying it's a parallel world. So I replied, "Don't stoke the hornet's nest." So there we go. So James Joseph Hollerfield Steedman, that's a very lengthy name. His favourite B.O.Ws were the Hunters from the original game, and I think we've covered that quite well. Certainly, it's the best Hunter. Not even the remake emulated the creepiness of the sounds they made. Absolutely. In terms of his favourite, the new ones, Evelyn from Resident Evil 7, a highly effective B.O.W. Quite an odd B.O.W. in that sense. The moulded were very much a side effect, weren't they? She didn't have a lot of control over the moulded. They just kind of dripped off her.
She controlled them.
Did she control them?
In the same way the leeches were controlled by Marcus.
Ah, there we go. I missed that point.
Just without the singing.
Did she intentionally create it though? I wasn't.
Yeah, I think so, but the DLC will hopefully answer that, because obviously there is Moulded who can wander around doing their own thing without her influence as well. So.
And then set up, for the game as post her demise.
Yeah, and of course Evelyn has this weird ability of making people want to be with her, part of the whole kind of family connection, which I suppose a bit of a defect in the actual programming, which is referred to when you're on the ship section, aren't you? But that could be improved upon going forward. And a tragic story though. Yeah. It's good. So he's also said the poison ivies were annoying. They were crap, weren't they? They were terrible B.O.Ws, the ivy. I'd agree with that. And the sewer bugs from Resident Evil 2 were pretty poor as well. But they're more secondary infections.
Secondary infectants, yeah.
Yeah.
They are annoying.
They are annoying.
Especially, with Sherry, it's, dear God, you can get killed very easily. Actually, that killed one of my no-save runs too once.
The most annoying, I'll put my pitch in, is the moths from Code Veronica in the ice bit. Oh my God.
Lava on your back. And you get poisoned.
Honestly, the number of times I hated it. It was annoying to the point, as you say, just keep coming back. There's something we haven't touched upon, and Thomas Fisher here has commented that the Plagas generally as a B.O.W. was certainly an effective B.O.W. The fact that it could be manipulated in so many ways, not to my liking, because I don't like the lack of explanation with El Gigante, Salazar, Sadler to an extent. You don't really know how and why. Yeah. And you're like, how did you create El Gigante? And that's always been an argument of mine, that post Resident Evil 4, they just couldn't be bothered with the B.O.Ws. They made a design and said, that's good. There's nothing wrong with the El Gigante, but they could have said, we got a particularly large Spanish person. And, compare El Gigante to Pluto. Both of them are equally ridiculous. Pluto from Dead Aim, used to wander around and kind of fall on you. You're like, okay, you stupid thing. But, they went to the effort in Dead Aim of putting a decent file in to know how and why he was created, to see how the T-Virus would react if particular senses were distorted or removed.
Pluto's file is one of the more horrific in the series.
Absolutely.
Razor his eyes out while he's still conscious, don't they? And
Exactly. Yeah, it's still ridiculous how Pluto ended up, But there was that slight degree of plausibility. El Gigante, there's no reason. It's just, someone's obviously a fan of Tolkien.
Yeah, but this is the same thing with the C virus as well in 6. It's like the variety of mutations and the size and the strength is just so variable. It's just like, obviously from a gameplay and design development, I mean, it's just adding more creativity and variety, but again, the context isn't really there.
And what makes it annoying, especially in Resident Evil 6, is there's some really good ideas and different designs. I like the one that gives off the gas and then that causes the infection. That was cool. It was a good one. But again, the snake one, I'll let them have that. That was fine. But as you said, there's so many different. What about the invisible bug things? I mean, how on earth is that related to, the other C virus creations? I haven't got a clue.
I'll tell you what does get a rough ride, though. In terms of practicality in human biological weapons, you'd have to say the Joavo is pretty close to being perfect, because they're intelligent, they can communicate, they will follow orders.
Work together as a team, yeah.
They will conceal their mutations with masks. They're trained in martial arts and firearms, and obviously they can regenerate when injured. So even compared to the tyrants, obviously they're not as strong, but
they enforce in numbers, and they've obviously got added strength and abilities, and yeah, I do agree with that. That's actually a valid point.
They're a big improvement on the Magini and the Ganado.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, I'd agree with that entirely.
Just the rest of the mutations in that game.
Yeah, it
Go
did
to the
really
extreme. They're all over the place.
So Thomas Fisher also said the plants seem to be a least effective B.O.W. He says just a little fire and they're done for. Yeah, absolutely.
Or they're not very movable, or they're mobile.
Quite why the Sacred Snakes wanted a plant with human DNA and the Ivy X and Y, I have no idea. Thomas Fisher, you have embarrassed me. The best design for a B.O.W. is the Tyrant R, which we completely forgot about, gentlemen. I know it's not much different from the standard 103, but it showed a bit of improvement with its programming for the MO disc, didn't it? It was programmed through that, which I liked. And of course, the Super Tyrant of it was particularly difficult as well, very much in the same mould as the standard 103. And it connected quite nicely to Death's Door as well, being the same Tyrant before anyone says otherwise, from Outbreak. It is. It clearly is. It's the same place at the same point.
As I said, it's the same thing we've talked about with Raccoon City. It's like the less number of larger bioorganic weapons running around the city, the better, really.
Who remembers that debate? I remember that debate. That was a stupid debate.
In the Umbrella Chronicles guidebook, it's literally called the Outbreak Tyrant, so I don't think you can get any more definitive than that.
Ashana Asim says the Nemesis and Regenerators are favourite BOWs. No, the Regenerators were probably the highlight of Resident Evil 4 in terms of BOWs.
Definitely.
Yeah. And was it Verdugo?
The left hand. Is that the right hand?
Those are my two favourite highlights.
If you look closely at them, they are literally a cross between a Xenomorph and a Predator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I liked about the Regenerators was their kind of that kind of weird noise they would make. I actually thought they were scarier than the Iron Maidens. I wasn't a big fan of the Iron Maidens, but I thought the Regenerators were just far better and creepier, even though the Iron Maidens are very similar. We've got disappointing designs from Ashna, the Eliminators from Resident Evil 0. But I think that's the point. I think they're supposed to be crap.
They're just like test subjects. I feel like that's the whole point there. You'd go in your animal research, they had caged monkeys and apes. That's surprising, actually, thinking about it now. There's never been like a mutated rabbit. There's like a pharmaceutical, I'm not saying this facetiously, like pharmaceutical companies and like animal testing, it's like quite often rabbits. And Umbrella Corporation, no, we don't do it by halves, we do it always on humans.
Yeah. Colin Evo, one awesome surname, it says the original Resident Evil Tyrant was his favourite, and the Gun Survivor one, getting a nice nod there. I absolutely agreed. Mikey Moat, the original Hunters still make me anxious. Totally sympathise with that. You can never underestimate or get lazy with them. We're in complete agreement. And then he's gone the Licker. We haven't really touched on the Licker. The Licker is his favourite and looks really visceral. Is visually an easy link to humans. Absolutely, that's a very good point. But with that elongated tongue. It reminds him of the Xenomorphs from Aliens as well.
Makes sense. So the crawling over ceilings and
quickly talk about the liquor. They've had some evolution over the years. You've got the main ones. Liquors are created through a normal zombie becoming dehydrated, basically, and mutating again.
It's secondary infection. It's similar to the VAC thing, but instead of creating crimson heads, it turns them into lickers.
Yeah.
It was an accidental mutation at first because a specimen was captured because they thought it was some kind of wild mutated tyrant, and following experimentation and seeing how good it was, they decided to weaponize it.
I was going to say, much like the Hunters, I think the original version of them in 2 is still the best version.
Absolutely.
The versions beyond that, I didn't particularly like the half-formed version in Outbreak, and the ones in the later games. It just was nice to have them come back, but they were just bullet sponges, basically.
Yeah.
Fires.
Outbreak ones are interesting because they're notably and perhaps intentionally smaller. And then you've got Suspended, which is obviously the halfway house. It's almost as if you've got that mutation, but then
Partway through, yeah.
There was a suggestion that from Outbreak were escaped ones as opposed to wild ones. Because it's so early on, remember, as well, isn't it? Because don't you see the lickers in Hellfire?
Yeah, I think the history behind them is similar to the Crimson Head. It all started with them finding one abnormal subject and they studied it and then manipulated the virus so it created many more of them. So they're not all wild in Raccoon City, they're all purposefully created, but that's how it started.
Some wild.
Yeah. But I think the Suspended isn't a halfway house as much as it's just a random, irregular mutation.
Okay. Mikey also says least favourite is the weird crab thing that you ate from Resident Evil 5.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah, I can help.
I like the continuity between that and the U3 and 4, but that's it.
Emmanuel Morales, favourite the Regenerators. Absolutely. Most effective Evelyn, which we've kind of touched upon there. Least effective goes to Plants. Oh, we're terrible. We should really be doing this podcast again. The best design goes to Talos, which of course is another tyrant we have forgotten. Sorry. Or Lisa Trevor.
Well, the Talos is worth forgetting, isn't it? Let's be honest.
He's got lasers coming out of his freaking hands.
Lasers.
But at least you get B.O.W. data from it, though. How many Chinook helicopters it took down or whatever it did. Oh dear. That was a disappointing tyrant, I think.
How do we class Lisa Trevor? I didn't class her as a bioorganic weapon. I class her as something completely different. She's an experiment, but she wasn't an experiment with that intent.
Yeah.
A play thing. So there's a difference between her and, say, Evelyn. We only know the experimentation backstory. We don't know anything specific about anything beyond the experimentation stuff. There's nothing about her history beforehand, is there?
No.
Remind me if I'm incorrect. No, whereas Lisa Trevor, obviously, we know a tragic backstory beforehand, which makes kind of the difference. Obviously, the outcome was exceptionally great for Umbrella's research, but it wasn't ever intended that way.
No, I suppose not. No, she's a walking lab herself, I suppose. Most disappointing for Emmanuel was the moulded.
I can still understand that. We've discussed this, that the variety and limitations in some respects that some people were disappointed with that.
Yeah,
no, I get it.
I've said on the Resident Evil 7 one, there's much scarier, frightening designs in the concept art than the sort of shambling humanoids that turn up in the game. There's some really, really freakily, almost spider-like ones in the concept art, so it'd have been nice to have seen them use them for a bit more variety.
And obviously they had this conversation about them having the dog and the family being infected like the Bakers themselves.
Yeah.
Decided not to go down.
It does look a bit disappointing that in Not a Hero, it just looks like you're just going to get more variations of essentially the same thing.
A big fat explodey one and
Yeah.
And we might get the spider one, you don't know. They might have hidden it from us. All of a sudden they add those ones in.
There we go. Stars Tyrant criticising Resident Evil 7. You heard it here first.
I can only apologise, everyone.
Stop being so negative. Fucking hell.
Yeah, stop it. Stop being so damn negative.
Craig Gordon, former Scotland and Sunderland goalkeeper, has said his personal favourites are the Hunter R's and the Anubis, just from the design point of view. That's interesting because we specifically talked about that, and I think we agree entirely. The Hunter R's did look quite cool. And Batman, you spoke about the Anubis being that kind of spindly, no organ B.O.W, which was quite cool. He says the most effective is the Nemesis, or, oh yes, quite right, the trash sweepers from Survivor. You've got to go a long way again to say why they're not effective. They were very good. He says trash sweepers are able to wipe out evidence, set off self-destruct sequences, evaporate when they die.
Yeah, they were nonsense.
He also supports the Hypnos Tyrant, as it could infiltrate enemy territory disguised as a normal human being before mutating and causing havoc. Absolutely spot on. Had the E series been successful, that would have been pretty useful in combat situations as well. And there's Craig Gordon come on our podcast. He's very much in our line. The modified T103s from Damnation seemed insanely strong as well. Yes, they did. And he's also mentioned about spreading the viruses depends on the environment. The South America environment from Dark Side Chronicles was especially useful for T and T Veronica spreading. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Gustavo Doria Costa, another person who's gone for Evelyn as the most effective B.O.W. Getting a lot of love, his old E series here. Best design, he's a Hunter fan, quite rightly. It's a classic design, still terrifying to this day. Thank you for that. Matthew West, Wesker from the last live action movie.
I've not seen it.
I haven't seen it.
Is this best?
He says, just for the funnies, Wesker from the last live action movie, I'll await the gunshots and brains being blown out.
He didn't really do a lot in the last movie.
Fill us in, Rompy. Fill us in.
He was more effective in the previous movies.
Thank you, Matthew. That's made our evening. Stephen M. Totten. He's a Licker, Nemesis, and Tyrant fan, so his dreams have been covered in this podcast. We've covered them in quite a lot of detail. Fabulous. Michael Alishun, who's a very frequent commenter on the Facebook page. Best BOWs, everything from Resident Evil Survivor. Good lad. And 1 to 3 as well. I do like Survivor. I like the fact that it basically is like all first-person shoot-em-ups, like House of Dead, just has everything.
I was going to ask, can someone remind me, the Gravedigger in 3, is that a secondary infectant or a bioorganic weapon?
Secondary infectant. The B.O.W. is the gulp worm from Veronica. Cool. I think the Gravedigger feasted off some stuff from the Dead Factory.
Graveyard or something.
Yeah, they made the sliders. Alex Graham has said Mr. X all the way as the effective. The worst, he's gone El Gigante.
It's just a giant thing. And it's the same with Nadesu in 5 as well.
Yeah, by extension, I would say Nadesu is even worse.
Yeah. Welsh Blessed has asked us to go into detail about Lisa Trevor, so there we go. Good old Welsh.
Well, again, as I said, like, Lisa Trevor, we wouldn't probably have a large amount of what's in the series without Lisa Trevor, let's be honest, as far as content goes. But again, not really a bioorganic weapon, just kind of an unfortunate victim.
Yes.
Because they even tried to kill her off, didn't they? And they couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So they just locked her up.
They forgot all they needed was a expensive chandelier. The old adversary to all known G-virus creatures, the chandelier.
And her mum's skull.
Yeah.
The Lickers become weaponized and used as a BOW in 5, don't they?
Yes, yeah. Essentially what Batman was saying was that they obviously had been an accident, then researched, and so even by Resident Evil 2 standards, they were already kind of weaponized.
Well, you had the evolved Lickers, didn't you? They were the bigger
Oh,
ones,
yes,
the darker coloured ones.
The thing is, to me, the general rule of thumb, the more I keep thinking about what we've been talking about, is tyrants aside, most of Umbrella's tinkering with its creations only makes them worse. Let's be honest, like, the more they tinker with it, the worse it gets.
Yes, don't mess with the 80s hunters. They were at the prime. Everything else has failed since.
But can't you apply that to life?
Well, that's deep for this time of evening. That's deep. So, honourable mentions, I'm going to put the hat in, of course, to the Neptune BOW. Everyone laughed. What a stupid idea. I'm a great white shark. It survived longer than you think. The Neptune was a superb BOW. It randomly appeared in Outbreak File 2, and then Umbrella obviously saw value in it and wanted to keep it in its Russian base. So, an honourable mention for Neptune. But, of course, I have that with my biased glasses on.
I'm going to say it was pretty lame in the original, to be honest.
Pour cold water over there. There we go. Fine.
Yeah, sadly.
Honourable mention also to Nautilus and Torpedo Kid. If you thought Neptune was bad with that water.
Yeah, I will at least give you the fact that Neptune is a shark and is inherently threatening, and then just oversized is even more threatening.
A Nautilus is just a sea sponge. Randomly protrudes torpedoes that have heads on them.
Rather easy to kill in Revelations 2, but the Revenants are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the Reapers in Resident Evil 5 were bloody hard.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, they are. They wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for that insta-death thing they can do.
A lot of the BOWs from Revelations 2 were particularly cool. I liked a lot of the designs.
There you go with another tyrant, blimey. Yeah. Neil Fisher becomes a sort of tyrant that has the abilities of Ouroboros.
Yes, of course. Jesus. Terrible. Fire us all.
So many tyrants and tyrant variants, we just don't even think about them all. But that's probably a good thing. Like, it just means that the ones that stick out stand out more, and the ones that haven't.
Yeah.
That said, though, I really did like that Neil Fisher fight in Rev 2.
Yeah.
I thought it was really well done.
I'd say another honourable mention goes to Raccoon City Zoo.
Good grief, Nick.
The hyenas, the hornbills, the Rassafella plant.
Well, they're all secondary infectants, though, aren't they? They're not.
I know.
I will say this, right, here's a moment for everybody involved. The one thing Operation Raccoon City gets right is the Mr. X's. There you go.
Do they?
Yeah, they're actually not bad.
Are they not bad?
They're reasonable boss battles in a terrible game.
Yeah, the Nemesis Beta in Operation Raccoon City as well.
Yes. Anyone else? Birkin? Good honourable mention.
Fantastic.
And all the dog-based B.O.Ws are generally quite successful, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
Ferocious.
Across the board. Hard to target, ferocious.
Well, thank you everyone for your comments. I think it's been quite a successful discussion. It's been a good podcast, but we've missed out half the game series, so
Didn't write any notes.
Feels like we just have to come back and do a second.
A director's cut version of it where we insert some in a slightly different voice.
Oh dear. The audio clips we've used here come from DC Douglas himself, and he recorded exclusively for Resident Evil Database, so thank you very much, guys, for these recordings which we've used on the podcast today. Thanks. On that note, we will finish our podcast session and move on to this edition of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
New season. New questions. New answers. And probably new facts. Welcome to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. Batman. Star Tyrants. George Trevor. Robbie McGregor. Mr. Spencer. Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
Welcome. Shouldn't take too long, this one. This is a B.O.W. special. Prepared 5 questions. I will caveat question 1. There could be more than one answers here, so you may have free reign on them. But if everyone can clear their desktop, you can open up Notepad. Let's start with question number 1. Name a T-virus mutant that has been both a B.O.W. and a secondary infectant. Same creature that's been a B.O.W. and a secondary infectant. I could only think of one, but there could be more that I've forgotten, so there we go. Question number 2. Is true or false? Is it true or is it false? The giant spider B.O.W. in Resident Evil 0 was a B.O.W. Is that true or is it false? And I used the term B.O.W. in the first part of the sentence just as a colloquial term for the fact that you're facing a giant spider bioorganic weapon. But was it an intentional B.O.W. or was it a secondary infectant? So is it true or false? The giant spider was a B.O.W. That caused some debate back in the day. Archives, translation, all that. Question number 3. What was the name of the snake B.O.W. in Resident Evil 6?
Oh. Fucking hell. I was just ready to type yawn there, thinking I've got him.
Oh dear. There we go. Question number 4. What was the name of the B.O.W. composed of human bodies and revenant corpses?
Oh, damn it.
This is another criticism of the recent games. There's been too many B.O.W. names, and trying to remember them all is such an art.
Because often they use really bizarre names, don't they?
They do. And finally, question number 5. Name all types of spider B.O.W.s and secondary infectants we have seen in the series, not including baby versions.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so name all types of the spider B.O.W.s and secondary infectants we've seen in the series, not including baby spiders. Okay. Let's see how well everyone has done. So, question number 1 was name a T-virus mutant that has been both a B.O.W. and a secondary infectant. Batman.
I'll say dogs, because you've got the Cerberus, which was a B.O.W., and the zombie dog, which was a secondary infectant.
Okay, Romby.
I went with liquor because, as we were talking about, there was secondary infectant people, and also then they started turning into bioorganic research.
And Starstone.
I had the liquor because of the fact that it was originally a secondary infectant, then became B.O.W.
Very good. Points for all. Yes, very good. I had Cerberus and Zombie Dog, but yeah, the liquor one was absolutely spot on as well. 2 types there. So, well done, yes. That's exactly what I meant. Zombie Dog are not Cerberus B.O.Ws. And of course, you get the Zombie Dog from 4D Executor, which is a different type of dog. So there you go. Right, so that's points for all. Good start, gentlemen. Good start. Question number 2 was true or false? The giant spider B.O.W. in Resident Evil 0 was a B.O.W. Is that true or is that false? Star's turn.
I can't remember the outcry of all this, so I'm just going to go for 50-50 and false.
Romby.
I have no idea because I don't know what this was either, but I'm just going to go 50-50, but I'm going to say true. So
Batman.
I'm going to say true, because surely that led to the web spinner, which is a B.O.W.
Ooh.
It's true. It is a B.O.W. So points to Batman and Rob. Yes. Question number 3. What was the name of the snake B.O.W. in Resident Evil 6? Batman, did you get this one?
Oh, it begins with I, doesn't it? It's Izzy-Jana or something. Elysiana, something like that.
Izzy is a
Izzy... I can't pronounce it. It's something like Izjualia or something like that.
Okay. Stars?
No idea.
No idea. Romby?
No idea. I'm sure, regardless of pronunciation, Batman's correct.
What was your answer, though?
Oh, I honestly have nothing. There were so many random names in there. I'm just saying I'm sure he's right.
Yes. Illusia. Close enough. There we go. Yes, correct there. Illusia. But yes, a stupid snake. Question number 4. What was the name of the B.O.W. composed of human bodies and revenant corpses? This is from Revelations 2. Stars Tyrant, did you know?
I can't even remember the B.O.W. and I can't even remember it. Remember this?
No.
The thing made of corpses?
Yes.
Yeah, no fucking
No.
idea.
Fucking I know. Romby?
Durga or something like that, I think is what I remember from playing it.
Batman?
Yeah, I think it's the Durga. I know there's a few different variants, but that's the only name I can remember.
Correct. It is Durga. Well done, Batman. Well done,
Where does
Romby.
this appear then?
It's in the when you're in the mine, you go in the warehouse and it comes in.
God,
And it's like got corpses surrounding the glowing orb, and it's got like a big hook thing.
I've only played through the game once, so I really can't remember it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Finally, Batman on for a full house here. Question number 5. Name all types of spider B.O.Ws and secondary infectants we've seen, not including baby variants. This is good. Right, we'll start with Romby.
I don't think I'm going to have all of them. Ones I can think of: Black Tiger, Web Spinner, Black Widow, and obviously there was a bigger version of that. And that was about it. Oh, and then there's just obviously the regular giant spiders, but I'm not sure if there's any others. I'm probably missing some others.
Okay, that's 4 you put there then. Stars turn.
I had Web Spinner, Black Tiger, and Black Widow. I thought they just used the same name for Code Veronica. Romby's made me think they're now a separate thing. I feel like I'm cheating if I put that down as 2 separate things. I just literally typed Tiger/Widow and U8 from RE5.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think of that one. So, yeah. Okay, so that's 4. Batman, can you improve on that?
I had the giant spider, the web spinner, Black Tiger, Black Widow, and the jumping man-eater from Darkside.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fucking hell.
I told you, there's always something I forget. This is like the same thing where we're talking about not playing Rev 2. I played literally through Darkside Chronicles once. I can't remember the spiders in them, and even if there was spiders, I can't even remember what the hell they were called. It doesn't surprise me at all that they're in there.
They're right at the beginning.
Yeah, I have no recollection of that at all.
I'm just checking, because you might get a point on U8. Is it a spider?
It probably isn't. I think it's more like a crab, isn't it? With the way the pincers are.
Yeah.
Kind of like a crab spider. Spider crab. Good guess, though.
Batman may get the points, but he doesn't quite get the points. The answers are giant spider, B.O.W., giant spiders, secondary infectants, from Resident Evil 2 and 3. Black Widow, Jumping Man-Eater, Web Spinner, and the Black Tiger Spider.
So which way round is it? Which is the tiger and which is the widow?
Black Tiger's the
Black
big
Tiger
one
is-
in remake.
Large Black Widow is the one in
Yeah,
Code Veronica.
yeah,
That's
I'll
underneath
let you
the
know.
ice.
Yeah, I'll just
because
let you
there's
know.
the regular spider and then
Yeah,
the giant.
right, okay.
Batman got the most. He forgot the giant spiders for secondary infectants. So Batman got 5 out of the 6. So it does get the point. So very good. So let's have a look at those final scores. Batman with a full house and our winner this time with 5 out of 5. Well done, Batman. Stars with a solitary 1 point. Ron B, 3 points. Well done. Not too bad, not too shabby. That finishes our quiz for this week. Join us next time and we'll have some more questions. Thank you all very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. A bit of a different one, I suppose, this time. We've not really ever focused just on the B.O.Ws. Next podcast is going to be all about Gold Edition.
Punctual. I like that. Is Krauser there?
He's dead.
Pity. But after all, just another expendable grunt. Thanks to you, however, Umbrella's one step closer to its re-establishment. And once it is, there will be significant changes in our world.
Quite when we'll release it. We'll try and get as close to the game as possible. It's out on the 12th, but because we are coming up to Christmas festivities, it could be afterwards. Who knows? And of course, a new Star Wars film's out, so I may be pre-engaged.
Watching it for the 17th time.
So I hope everyone enjoyed that podcast. We'll put some feelers up for Gold Edition if anyone wants to comment. And on that note, it's goodbye from me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, Stars Tyrant.
And goodbye from me, Rombie.